Hi, guys. Welcome to the Church Split. My name is Will. We're just jumping right into it today. So, guys, if you've been living under a rock lately and you don't know about this, let me get caught up to speed. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, Wes Huff debated Billy Carson, a self-proclaimed leading expert in the world on ancient manuscripts and texts. Well, he was confronted by an actual expert, Wes Huff, who essentially humiliated him so bad that Billy Carson is now threatening legal action, tried to make sure that the episode didn't get aired, all that sort of thing. Well, oddly enough, apparently, if you act insufferable, it actually gets you shut down, right? It actually works against you, because what ends up happening is that as he's trying to shut down this entire conversation, it actually propels Wes Huff into superstardom and gets him on the Joe Rogan podcast. If that's not like, man, you just served, like you just played yourself, I don't know what is. That's amazing. So what I wanted to do, though, the entire conversation is worth having. I have a few thoughts on different parts of the conversation, but I just wanted to respond to a couple things today as far as what took place in the conversation. So again, go check out the original conversation, but here are some important moments within that. Let's look.
If a miracle did take place, like let's assume that there is actually a higher power that occasionally interacts with human beings. And if a miracle did take place and you were there, you don't have a camera, you don't have a cell phone, you don't have a pen, you can't write things down, maybe you can't even read. And you have this thing that happens to you, and this thing changes the course of human history. This thing changes the direction, that the ideology that these people subscribe to, and the moral and ethical structure that they live their life by. It changes untold billions of human beings from that point on.
Yeah.
Pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
That in itself, even if this is just a revelation without a divine interaction, that's a fucking miracle.
Yeah.
It's a miracle that it was created at all. Like the whole idea that Christianity, when you're saying that the book of, was it the book of Isaiah?
Yeah.
That the same book is exactly the same as, like, that's a miracle. That's pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
If you just imagine.
Now, I want to talk about this real quick. And of course, guys, I should have mentioned it's Joe Rogan podcast, so language warning, I guess. But this is actually really fascinating to hear, because Joe's not wrong. It is a miracle that Christianity happened, not because of just the resurrection, which is, of course, the pinnacle of the miracle, but the fact that it spread the way it did. And what's interesting is that you have to ask what accounts for the data. And that is actually what Wes does here. And one of the things that Wes is really good at, something I've been really impressed with, is he's such a clear communicator. He's gracious and kind. And when he offers pushback, he does it in the way that you'd expect a good teacher to. Probably actually something, a lesson that we could all learn from, because despite my theological disagreements with Wes, his methodological ones are on point. Let's go and check it out.
Imagine the sheer number of illiterate people, the sheer number of days that have to go by where people are telling the story exactly the same, and that it's entrusted in the hands of these very few people that are so dedicated to it that they get the exact words right 1,000 years later. Pretty bananas.
Well, I mean, that is kind of the crazy thing about Christianity, where you have this Jewish itinerant guy who's walking around first century Roman occupied Judea. He's making some pretty audacious claims to be God himself. And then he predicts his own death and resurrection. And then his disciples they think it's over. Like, they're like, he's dead. We're done.
Yeah.
And then they go from 11, scared men, because Judas commits suicide, scared men in an upper room, to completely overhauling the Roman world.
This is really important, by the way, because another thing that you can kind of tell when something's like real and authentic is when it has embarrassing details. The Gospels are filled with embarrassing details. And, we have one written by John and the other by Matthew, who actually travel. And they'll like, the way they sometimes record the stuff, it's like, and we must have been idiots, because he was talking about his resurrection and we didn't get that, man. So it's really funny to see that, where it's like they include the embarrassing detail, that they even were so scared that they hid. They missed the fact that he was talking about his resurrection. They missed. So what they probably were like, it's so obvious not what he was alluding to. They were scared. And then, like he said, they overturned the entire Roman world. Pretty cool stuff. Now let's listen to what more he had to say.
In only a couple hundred years, because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like, there's something different that goes on there, that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So, what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
That's actually a really important question that everyone has to answer, because if Jesus Christ rose from the dead, Christianity is true. I don't care how many other ways people want to try to get around that. Christianity is true if Jesus Christ rose from the dead. So it is a question everyone needs to ask themselves as a truth claim, and a lot of the evidence shows, yes, inference to the best explanation must be that. And what's fascinating is that more and more people are becoming open to this, because we have taught hardcore naturalism and materialism into the culture for so long, and people are starting to realize it actually doesn't account for all the data. It doesn't comport with reality. There does seem to be a metaphysical or supernatural element beyond our physical domain. And because of that, people are starting to fall more and more into Christianity, or be more and more inquisitive or open to this idea. And it's also why you're seeing an increase in like even the New Age movement and other things, because people are realizing, again, spiritual things are real. And if they're real, then that very strongly increases the chance of God being real. And if God's real, then the fact that miracles can take place. And if miracles can take place, Jesus Christ could have risen from the dead. And especially if everyone says who they are, like Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, then it can easily happen. And of course, there's different arguments that you could go down that little line with on how to just verify all those things. But important questions to be asked.
Well, I think so. As a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out.
So what's actually fascinating here that Joe does what he does often, and often what I see other agnostics and others like that do, which is, well, yeah, but thousands of years and oral tradition and people are illiterate. What can we know? We can't know. And what's interesting is that we can know. We can look at things and compare various data points, and we can get a pretty good idea. Wes is a textual scholar, so he actually talks quite a bit about that process. And I'm not a textual scholar. I've nerded out in the textual world, but I'm not a textual scholar, and I find that world fascinating. But because of that, we can know with certain things. And Joe's not an expert in this field. Don't expect him to. He's a comedian and a mixed martial arts guy, and now a giant podcaster. So he probably wouldn't know these things. But that's what's so fun right here, is that you see Joe starting throughout this entire conversation being confronted with very real facts about the historicity of the Bible and manuscript history. It's why one of the areas of textual criticism, looking back in my earlier years of apologetics, I think textual criticism is a very lacking area in apologetics. So I'm thankful that someone like Wes is on the forefront. And by the way, can we please acknowledge that fact that the things that we talk about in seminary and Bible college and like academic, weird, nerdy studies world is now being talked about right here on the Joe Rogan podcast, forefront on the world stage. That is craziness.
Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on.
I want you to notice how Wes does this. He mentions, and this is a skill that not everyone has, and it's something that has to be learned. But what he does is he calls back to the fact that Joe Rogan has completely mentioned that there's other things. There's some things out there that we don't understand or don't fully know yet. There's something more to our world that's, as they put it, a little crazy. So what's fun is that as soon as Joe starts doing this thing where it's like, look, man, people just find that a little too crazy that a man actually rose from the dead, you know? And that's Joe expressing doubt on a lot of people's behalf, but also his own. And Wes is like, yeah, but you already said this. He remembered that, but he did it in a way that wasn't like a jerk move, wasn't condescending. Because this is the difference, by the way, I want to make sure I mention this, between Apologetic Fight Club on YouTube, where some of us apologetic people or theological people might disagree with someone's theology or apologetic methods. So we might like clash harder there, but this is different because that's in-house debates. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ, so we can all just like bicker at each other about just like a family, right? You know, you can disrespect your sibling, but nobody better disrespect your sibling. You know what I'm saying? That's your privilege. So there's the in-house debate topics, but this here is why it's okay. We have to be winsome, especially when we're dealing with other people, because we don't want to push them away. Wes does a great job at not falling into any traps here, not taking offense or basically saying, no, Joe, that's dumb. He just pulls in and has a conversation. So important.
Yeah.
And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well, how
many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus's ministry, who were there, say at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right. This is also really good because you can tell Joe's never been confronted with this sort of evidence before. He's had Stephen Meyer on, who's talked about intelligent design and stuff, but this is a textual scholar. And that means you have to deal with the textual evidence and the historical evidence, not philosophical inferences from biology, which is also a powerful argument because you get design and all that there. But this is different because you can tell that Joe hasn't actually looked into the fact that Paul says these things, and he goes, well, how would you verify someone rose from the dead? This is actually probably one of the best things that Joe Rogan does. I disagree with Joe on plenty of things, but one of the things that he's really good at doing is asking the question. And it's just like back then, what oftentimes happens that people look at the ancient world and go, wow, look at what they built with such like primitive tools. Like, they must have been brilliant. They were so smart. They were all so self-sufficient. And that's all very true. We give them geniushood over here. But then when it comes to verifying supernatural things, the supernatural claims and the evidence of the resurrection and all those things, well, they must have been cavemen and kind of dumb. And so it's this weird thing that you'll notice a lot of people are like, well, they can't verify these things. They were pre-enlightenment, they were kind of stupid. But then they over here, they go, wow, they were brilliant. When really they're not so different from you and I, just living in a different culture. They're human beings who are smart. They are the highest of intelligence amongst all created beings. So it shouldn't surprise people when they go, oh, okay, a guy rose from the dead. Where is he at? All right, there's 40 people that are following him around. Yeah, sure, I believe you. Let me just see him myself. Oh, he's not here. Okay, yeah, joke's on you. I'm going to go tell everyone now that you guys are a joke. Or, oh, that's him. That's the risen Jesus. So you have those kind of scenarios that can take place and will take place. So Wes is correct to mention the fact that there's a reason why when people talk about the different biblical things, that's why Luke and Matthew, they mentioned the different high priests and the different political rulers at the time, is for historical validity. Is to verify that. And you can actually, they're basically saying yeah, I did all the homework. You can go check this out yourself, because so many of those claims have been easily debunked. Like you said, the feeding of the 5,000, just really solid stuff.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that. And this guy comes back.
That sounds terrible, by the way. Like, new fear unlocked. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion, and we
Pretty
know
brutal.
that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate, because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards.
This is also, I'll end it kind of here because you go throughout the whole video and it's so good. There's so many good things, but he's absolutely correct that there are so many documents that actually say that, yes, Jesus had to have died by crucifixion, but not only that. And this is, again, where Wes shows that he's really good at this and he's a professional, because the idea that Jesus just may not have died is called the swoon theory. Like, he didn't actually die. He just swooned and fell over, like passed out because of all the pain and suffering. And so he kind of, like, people thought he was dead, but he wasn't, is pretty much laughed at by every scholar. But Wes doesn't say that. Like, he just is like, well, they're actually just pretty good at their jobs, because the Romans were professional killers. They've done a lot of crucifixions. That's why they would break their legs to make sure, like, if someone was taking too long to die, they just break the leg. So that way they would suffocate under crucifixion. Or in Jesus's case, he seemed to have died, and then they stabbed him with a spear to make sure that he did. And then Wes even talks about medical experts that examined what crucifixion did to the body and then read the gospel accounts on the different events, that, like the water that poured out of the side when stabbed and all. It's like, oh, that actually all seems to be signs that he suffocated basically on his own blood. That's what killed him. And so even medical examiners go, yeah, this all lines up. And again, this is people back then who did not have the full medical understanding that we have today. So it just aligns with what you would expect from eyewitness testimony. Why would they include these weird details if it wasn't so true? So anyway, all that to say that this conversation was so very important. And I want more of these individuals to be on the Joe Rogan podcast. We need to push for more of this sort of thing. And I'm looking forward to seeing how many more Christians we can get on that sort of thing. So that way we can have the faith and the facts for the faith actually proclaimed to the nations abroad. So I just want to say, Wes, you're awesome. I really appreciate your work. Thank you for what you do. And on behalf of everyone, I hope you know that your work is very much appreciated. People might disagree with you theologically. I do as well, but that doesn't mean that this work isn't important, because you're doing work of the kingdom. You're giving the gospel, not only giving the gospel, but you're giving reasons to believe. And that's what really matters, because everything else, let's bring everyone into the kingdom, and then we can have our theological debates later. And that's an important point to be had. Christians don't get too caught up in the theological disagreements to the fact where you actually don't recognize someone as a brother. This man is doing great work. I'm excited to see what more he does. And I'm also excited to see who else Joe Rogan's going to have on. He's had Dr. Stephen Meyer on, and now he's had Wes Huff on. What other Christians is he going to have? So anyhow, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. So take care and God bless.